The situation with the Houthis is getting worse. Every single day, American service members in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden are dodging missiles and drones. And with this current strategy, it's just a matter of time before more Americans are killed in the region. We've also got some new poll data out of Israel, where they asked their citizens how they feel about the possibility of kicking off an attack against Hezbollah, as well as their thoughts on a negotiated settlement to the end of this war. It's a lot to get into, so I'm glad you're here. I'm recording this at 7 a.m. Central on Saturday, February 24th, 2024, which marks the 2-year anniversary since Russia kicked off their full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I think at the time, I imagine most people did not expect that 2 years later, that war would still be raging. We'll certainly get into that conflict here in the coming days, providing some updates on what is happening on that battlefield. So starting with the Houthis, some updates from Central Command here. If you remember, on February 18th, the MV Rubimar, which was a Belize-flagged UK-owned bulk carrier, was struck by Houthi missiles. That's the one where there was damage that occurred and the crew was successfully evacuated. Central Command says that ship is anchored, but taking on water. The attack caused significant damage to the ship, which caused an 18-mile oil slick. The Rubimar was transporting over 41,000 tons of fertilizer when it was attacked, which could spill into the Red Sea and worsen this environmental disaster. Wanted to bring that up because I think at times we view these ships as just like empty vessels. They're never just empty vessels, even when they don't have cargo. There's a ton of things inside of that ship, the oil, the fuel that can spill out into the water. So every one of these attacks, it's not just a matter of does it cause casualties, but what is the damage to the surrounding area. Fortunately, at this point, I believe the Houthi attacks have not caused any fatalities. Of course, every single day, every missile, every drone puts that statistic at risk of growing. Then on February 24th, U.S. Central Command said they conducted 4 self-defense strikes against 7 Houthi anti-ship missiles and 1 Houthi anti-ship ballistic missile launcher that was prepared to launch towards the Red Sea. They also shot down a one-way attack drone in self-defense. Then on February 22nd, the U.S. aircraft and coalition warship shot down 6 Houthi one-way attack drones and 1 unmanned aerial vehicle in the Red Sea. They say the UAVs were identified as heading towards the coalition warships and were deemed an imminent threat. Then later that day, the Houthis fired 2 anti-ship ballistic missiles from southern Yemen into the Gulf of Aden. The missiles impacted the MV Islander, a Palau-flagged UK-owned cargo carrier, causing 1 minor injury and minor damage. That ship is continuing on their voyage. And then just yesterday, on February 23rd, Central Command destroyed 7 Houthi mobile anti-ship cruise missiles that were prepared to launch towards the Red Sea. This is a pretty significant uptick the last few days, last couple weeks really, over what we've seen recently, which follows in line with a recent Houthi statement. Their leader gave a speech the other day where he said, quote, "Operations in support of Gaza in the Red and Arab Bahrain, the Gulf of Aden, and the Bab el-Mandab Strait are continuing, and we are heading towards escalation." He said the escalation in sea operations increased in quantity and quality, and missiles, drones, and military boats were activated. So straight from their perspective, they are heading towards escalation, starting to use more and more methods to attack military and civilian assets in the area. The U.S. strategy at this point has largely been to try to intercept munitions, rockets, and drones fired at commercial or military vessels, and at times conduct some of these self-defense strikes into Houthi territory. I think it's safe to say at this point this strategy is not working. The Houthis are continuing to launch multiple attacks a day into this area, and I think it's worth mentioning because I feel like this goes under the radar. Unfortunately, a lot of times we do have U.S. service members in harm's way here. The Houthis have not yet killed an American service member in these strikes because our forces are pretty good and the equipment and the technology is pretty good, and they are able to shoot down any of these incoming threats. That is not always a guarantee. Equipment fails, technology fails. We are flawed as people and make mistakes. And it's just a matter of time before one of these drones or missiles gets through and strikes a U.S. warship, killing American service members. You know, unfortunately, a few weeks ago, we had the strike in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. soldiers. We've been very fortunate in Iraq and Afghanistan that many of the drones and rockets have either been shot down, missed the base, or have only caused minor injuries. all things considered. No fatalities since these attacks kicked off in mid-October. But what we have right now in the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea is we have placed American forces directly in harm's way with no real end in sight. Every single day, they are having to, it's for no lack of effort by the Houthis trying to kill Americans there. It's the skill and the technology of our forces to be able to prevent that from happening. There's no clear way that this is going to end anytime soon. Now, the Houthis, for their part, have said that as soon as the siege of Gaza is lifted and humanitarian aid is allowed in, they will stop these attacks into the area. I am not entirely on board with that. I don't know that that is the sole reason the Houthis are carrying out these attacks, but I also don't think that's really on the table right now. I don't know if anybody else feels differently, but it's hard to imagine that in the next 24, 48, 72 hours, anytime in the near future, there is going to be a negotiated settlement and an end to the fighting in Gaza. So that is not going to be the solution here. So what is? I don't know. It looks like the military strikes carried out by the U.S. and U.K. forces, all things considered, were relatively small in scale. Those didn't work. If those ramp up significantly, we become much more involved in the region. I'm not going to advocate for a war with the Houthis, but the situation we found ourselves in, or that we've placed ourselves in that area right now, is untenable long term. We have to do something. Again, I just want to reiterate, every single day, American service members are dodging missiles and drones that will eventually kill more Americans. That's happening every single day now. Then shifting over to Israel, we've got a new poll out of the Israel Democracy Institute that asked some pretty interesting questions that I thought were worth diving into. The poll, for reference here, they spoke with 510 men and women that were interviewed in Hebrew, and then 102 that were interviewed in Arabic. So you'll see the results, and I'll put up some images here where they kind of break out the result in a couple ways. One between the Jewish population and the Arabic population, and then they also, within the Jewish population, break it out kind of by political ideology, left, right, or center. Now the questions, I like this. They're much more detailed than we see in some American polls where it's, one sentence. They actually have very, very specific questions they ask with a lot of detail. So I'm going to read through each one of these. They said, which of the following two possibilities will better ensure the security of residential localities in the north in the future and return home all of the residents who were evacuated? An intentionally mediated political agreement that distances Hezbollah from the border, or an all-out Israeli attack on Hezbollah forces in Lebanon? So cutting right through here, 42% said political agreement is the best solution. 46% said an all-out attack by Israel against Hezbollah is the preferred solution here, or is the ideal solution to accomplish that ends. Now, if you look at the Jewish sample, they say this, or they have 65% on the right say that an attack is the preferred option, which is notable here, of course, but even the 40% in the center is what makes me think that this war between Hezbollah and Israel is really in the cards. There's a part of me that looks at this and wants to say, don't you know that this would be a significant fight, that there would be a lot of casualties inside of Israel, that Hezbollah has the rockets, missiles, and drone capability to inflict significant damage on Israeli cities. They likely, I think by all estimates that I've seen, have more munitions than Israel has interceptors to shoot them all down. Some of them are going to get through, and they have the range to attack just about everything across Israel. But then that is also me pretending to know more and recognize more about this threat than the people living under it every single day, and that's not fair. So I think the way to view this information, the 65% on the right that say an attack is the preferred option and the 40% in the center that say an attack is the preferred option, is they know what they're talking about. They know what they're getting into. A war with Hezbollah is not some crazy unknown factor for people living in Israel. They recognize what that might be. Even still, 40% in the center think that, or we'll say 46% overall, think that an attack into Hezbollah territory is the preferred option to get to the end state of a more peaceful northern border. And then the second one that I thought was worth getting into was talking about an agreement to the end of the war, and it's a very nuanced question. So unlike some of the polls in the United States where they say something like, do you support a ceasefire, yes or no, or don't know, right? Those are the only options. what does a ceasefire mean? On whose terms? What comes with that? It's all left out of the question. Not here. They get pretty detailed. They say, would you support or oppose an agreement to end the war, which includes the release of all of the hostages, long-term military quiet with guarantees from the United States, and a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia, in return for the release by Israel of large numbers of Palestinian prisoners, an extended ceasefire, and agreement to the establishment of a demilitarized Palestinian state in the long term? So that's a lot. That is a little bit more than do you support ceasefire, yes or no, or do you support a negotiated end to this war? This is a very detailed agreement that would be reached. That said, a lot of these things I think are in the conversation when it comes to how this war could come to a close. Now, when you look at the Arab sample here, 77% support a negotiated settlement, just like this, to end the war. However, on the other side, only 37% of the Jewish respondents say that they support an agreement like this. And this one that is pretty divided along political leanings. So those on the left show 74% support for an agreement like this to end the war, whereas on the right, it's only 22%. And I wanted to bring this up because I think it shows just how divided a conversation this is politically within Israel. I've said before, I barely understand American politics, so I'm not going to try to dive into the politics of another country and fully understand the nuance of those different conversations. But a lot of times, when it's not broken out like this and you just see Israeli support as an entire thing, it's easy to maybe take the wrong information away from that. So I wanted to show this, that there, even within Israel, this very detailed possible agreement to end the war is pretty significantly split. 74% versus 22% support is a big, big divide. But that's all I've got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out the Substack linked in the description below. We put out 3 free articles this week. The first was talking about Iran's strategy in the Middle East, their proxy strategy. The second was about 3D printed weapons and kind of the evolution of homemade weapons in Myanmar civil war. And the one that just came out yesterday was talking about a rise in narco-trafficking violence in Ecuador. It's all free, again, linked in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.